I didn't know the moment my childhood home would stop feeling like a home would happen in the doorway of my own bedroom, with a woman young enough to be my older sister pointing down the hallway like she owned the air I breathed. "Fine," she said, voice sharp and sweet at the same time. "Pack your bags. You have until the end of the week to get out." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard her. My brain tried to protect me, like if I blinked hard enough, the sentence would rearrange itself into something normal, something that made sense. I'm 17, still in high school. My backpack was on the floor. My art project was spread across the garage because it was the only place I could work without someone hovering over my shoulder. And now this woman, Jessica, my dad's 28-year-old wife, the same secretary he left my mom for, was telling me to leave my own house. My dad stood behind her like a shadow. His face was already in that expression I'd learned to dread over the past year. Not angry, not apologetic, just blank. Like he'd turned off the part of himself that used to be my father. "If you can't respect our rules," he said, "maybe you should go live with your mom." Our rules. The word "our" hit me harder than the threat. Because this wasn't about rules. Not really. It was about power. About Jessica trying to prove she was the new queen of a kingdom she'd stolen, and my dad letting her, because it was easier than facing the wreckage he'd made. I felt my throat burn. I felt my hands shake. I said something ugly, something I'm not proud of. And Jessica's eyes flashed, like she'd been waiting for me to slip so she could finally pull the trigger. So I locked myself in my room, slid down the door, and called my mom. I was sobbing so hard I could barely form words. And then my mom's voice went dangerously calm. "Honey," she said, each syllable measured like a match being struck. "Listen to me. They're not throwing you out." A pause. "That house is still in my name." My stomach dropped. My heart didn't just race, it changed direction. And my mom said, in a tone I'd never heard from her before, "I'm coming home tomorrow, and they're the ones who are leaving." Before everything cracked open, my life was ordinary in the way you don't realize is precious until it's gone. I grew up in a quiet suburb outside the city. Tree-lined streets, bikes in driveways, neighbors who waved like they actually meant it. Our house wasn't a mansion, but it was warm, lived in, the kind of place where you could smell dinner before you even walked in, where the hallway had dents from moving furniture too fast, where every corner held a memory you didn't think you'd ever have to defend. I was an only child, which meant I lived my whole life in the center of two very different kinds of love. My dad was the tough love parent. He wasn't cruel when I was younger, just intense. He believed the world only respected people who performed well. Good grades, sports, scholarships. He used to stand at the edge of my basketball practices with his arms crossed, nodding when I pushed myself harder. When I brought home a report card with straight A's, he'd give me a proud smile, but it always came with, "Good, now keep it up." My mom balanced him out. She worked part-time as a librarian and somehow made calm feel like a superpower. She was the one who saved every little drawing I ever made. The one who didn't care if I was good at art, just that I was alive when I did it. She'd sit beside me at the kitchen table while I sketched and say, "This is you. Don't lose this." I used to think my parents were happy. Not movie happy, not romantic comedy happy, but stable. They argued sometimes about money, about my dad working too much, about small things like grocery lists, but it always ended in normal silence. The kind of silence that meant, "We're fine, we're just tired." Then, about 2 years ago, my dad got a promotion at the manufacturing plant where he worked. He came home that night with this new energy, like he'd finally reached the version of himself he'd been chasing his whole life. He started dressing sharper, talking louder, laughing in a way I hadn't heard in years. With the promotion came longer hours. At first, it made sense. That's what promotions do, right? More responsibility, more stress, more late nights. But then Jessica appeared. Dad called her his personal secretary, like it was just another tool he'd been given with his new title. She started showing up at our house sometimes. Papers, folders, a laptop. She had this smile that never reached her eyes, and a voice that always sounded like she was performing politeness for someone watching. My mom was friendly, too friendly. I didn't notice it at the time, but now I can see it. The way she'd straighten her posture when Jessica walked in. The way her laughter got a little higher, a little forced. The way she'd watch my dad and Jessica with this quiet, scanning look, like she was gathering evidence she didn't want to admit she needed. And my dad? He started forgetting things. My school events, dinner plans, family movie nights. He'd text last minute, "Running late, don't wait up." Mom tried to cover for him like she was patching holes in a sinking boat with her bare hands, but I'd still hear the arguments late at night, muffled voices behind their bedroom door that would stop the second my footsteps creaked in the hallway. Then, a year ago, the ordinary life ended in one conversation that didn't even feel real. Dad sat my mom and me down at the dining table. He didn't cry. He didn't pace. He didn't look guilty. He said it like he was announcing a schedule change. "I'm leaving," he told my mom. "I'm in love with Jessica. We're going to get married." I remember the exact way my mom's face drained of color, like all the blood in her body had decided to abandon her at once. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. She just went still. And I sat there thinking, this can't be my family. This has to be some other kid's nightmare. But it was mine. After that, everything moved too fast and too slow at the same time. Dad moved out. Mom stopped eating, stopped laughing, stopped being the woman who used to hum while she washed dishes. And I, 17, still a kid in every way that mattered, started learning what it felt like to live inside a house where love had been replaced by damage control. I didn't know yet that the worst part wasn't my dad leaving. The worst part was him coming back. With her. When my mom left to stay with my grandparents, the house didn't get quieter. It got hollow. She sat me down at the kitchen table a month after the divorce, her eyes ringed with exhaustion, her hands wrapped tightly around a mug she wasn't drinking from. "I need some time," she said softly. "Just a little while. I need to remember how to breathe again." She asked if I wanted to come with her. I didn't. Not because I didn't love her, but because this was my house, my school, my life. I told myself that if I stayed, if I kept things normal, maybe everything else wouldn't collapse completely. Maybe my dad would remember he was still a father. I was wrong. 2 weeks after my mom left, my dad moved back into the house. With Jessica. He framed it like he was doing me a favor. "It's better if you have family around," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Stability." Jessica smiled from behind him, already carrying boxes inside like she'd been waiting for permission her entire life. The first few days were almost surreal. They acted like we were playing house in some badly written sitcom. Jessica cooked dinners I didn't ask for. My dad tried to make small talk at the table, asked about school, about my art project, like the past year hadn't happened. I barely answered. I stayed in my room. I wore headphones. I came out only when I had to. I wasn't trying to punish them. I just didn't know how to exist around people who had blown up my family and expected me to clap for the rebuild. That's when Jessica started pushing. At first it was subtle. "Shoes don't go there. You should clean your room more often. You need to be home earlier on school nights." She said you should a lot, like she was testing how far she could step into a role no one had given her. The first time she tried to ground me, I actually laughed. It came out sharp and bitter before I could stop it. "You're not my mom," I said. "You don't get to punish me." Her smile tightened. She didn't argue, but later that night, my dad came into my room and told me I needed to be more respectful. That was new. My dad used to listen, used to ask questions, used to care what I thought. Now he just relayed Jessica's complaints like they were official reports. My grades slipped. I couldn't focus. Every time I sat down to study, my thoughts spiraled back to the same question. How did this become my life? Jessica noticed everything. The way I dressed, the music I listened to, the fact that I spent hours in the garage working on art instead of doing something useful. She started criticizing my hobbies openly. "Art won't get you anywhere," she said once, glancing at my sketches like they offended her personally. "You need to think about real careers." My dad nodded along. That hurt more than anything she could have said. Because he used to defend me, used to tell people I was talented, used to brag. Now, he just stood there, letting his new wife rewrite the rules of my life like she was erasing chalk off a board. The tension built slowly, like pressure behind my ribs. Every interaction felt like a test I was destined to fail. And the house my mom used to protect with her presence, started to feel hostile, like the walls were watching me, waiting to see if I'd finally break. The breaking point came over something stupid. A garage, a deadline, and a woman who mistook control for authority. The garage had always been my escape. When everything in the house felt tight, too loud, too tense, too full of unsaid things, I'd retreat there with my sketchbooks, my paints, the half-finished sculptures that never judged me for needing time. It smelled like old wood and oil and dust, and for a few hours at a time, I could breathe. That week, I had a major art project due. Not just another assignment, the project, the one that counted toward my final grade, The one my art teacher had pulled me aside about, telling me quietly, "This matters. You're good at this. Don't rush it." So I spread everything out in the garage, canvases leaning against the wall, brushes soaking in jars, my work in progress set carefully on the table, fragile in a way that felt personal. I was in the middle of adjusting a detail when Jessica appeared in the doorway. She didn't knock. She never knocked. "We need to clean the garage today," she announced, arms crossed, eyes already scanning the space like she was mentally throwing half my life into trash bags. "Not today," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "I have a deadline. I just need the space for a few more days." She scoffed. "This mess has been here long enough." "It's not a mess," I said. "It's my project." She stepped inside, heels clicking against the concrete floor, and started moving things, lifting a canvas, nudging my supplies with her foot. My chest tightened. "Please don't touch that," I said, sharper now. "You could ruin it." She straightened slowly, eyes narrowing. "Your hobby is not more important than keeping the house clean," she said. "This is a shared space." Something snapped. "Shared?" I laughed, bitter and loud. "You moved in 2 weeks ago. You don't get to decide what happens in this house." Her face flushed red. "I am your stepmother," she said, emphasizing the word like a weapon, "and you will respect me." That's when the words came out, hot and ugly and fueled by months of swallowed anger. "You're not my mother," I yelled. "You're the woman my dad cheated with. You don't get to pretend this is your house or your family." Silence slammed down around us. Then Jessica started crying. Not quiet tears. Performative ones. Right on cue, my dad walked in through the side door, briefcase still in his hand. "What's going on?" he demanded. She turned to him, voice shaking. "He's screaming at me. He's completely out of control." I stared at my dad, waiting. Waiting for him to ask what happened. Waiting for him to see the canvases, the supplies, the context. He didn't. Instead, he looked at me like I was a problem to be managed. "You can't talk to her like that," he said. "She's trying to keep this house in order." "This house?" I shot back. "Since when is this her house?" "That's enough," he snapped. "You need to learn respect." That word again. Respect. It felt hollow coming from a man who'd shown none. I felt my hands shake. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. "You're not my parents," I said, my voice cracking despite my best effort. "My mom is the one you drove away. And I hate this. I hate what you've done to us." Jessica sobbed harder, clutching my dad's arm. Dad's face darkened. "If you can't follow our rules," he said, "maybe you should go live with your mom." "Fine," I yelled. "I'd rather live in a cardboard box than stay here with you." Jessica looked at me then, really looked at me, and her tears stopped instantly. "Fine," she said coldly. "Pack your bags. You have until the end of the week to get out." The room tilted. I waited for my dad to stop her. He didn't. That was the moment I understood something deep and terrible. He wasn't confused. He wasn't overwhelmed. He had chosen. I walked out without another word, locked myself in my bedroom, and slid down the door as my breathing turned into sobs I couldn't control. My phone shook in my hand as I called my mom. "I can't do this anymore," I cried. "They're kicking me out." There was a pause on the line. Then my mom's voice went calm in a way that scared me. "They're doing what?" I told her everything, through broken sentences and shaking breaths. When I finished, she exhaled slowly. "Honey," she said, "listen carefully." And then she dropped the truth that would change everything. "That house," she said, "it's not your father's." My breath caught. "It's mine. My parents put it in my name when we got married." My world didn't just shift. It flipped. "I'm coming home tomorrow," she said, "and no one is throwing you out of your home." I stared at the wall, adrenaline flooding my veins. For the first time in a year, I didn't feel powerless. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, my phone clutched in my hand like it was the only solid thing left in the world. Every sound in the house made my muscles tense. The low murmur of my dad and Jessica talking behind their bedroom door, footsteps in the hallway, the creak of the stairs settling. I replayed the argument over and over, like my mind was trying to find the exact second where everything went wrong, the moment I could have said something differently, the sentence I shouldn't have yelled, the tone I should have softened. But no matter how many times I ran it back, it always ended the same way. They told me to leave, and my dad didn't stop them. That hurt more than the threat itself. Around 2 a.m., my phone buzzed, a text from my mom. "I'll be there early, before they wake up. Try to rest." I didn't know how to rest, knowing that tomorrow would blow everything apart. By morning, my body felt hollow, like I'd cried all the weight out of myself. I moved quietly, afraid that if I made noise, Jessica would burst into my room and remind me I was on borrowed time. Then I heard the front door open. Soft, careful, a sound I hadn't heard in months. "Hey, sweetheart." I froze. My mom stood in the doorway of my room, travel bag still slung over her shoulder. She looked tired, older maybe, but there was something different in her eyes. Something steady, anchored. I didn't say anything. I just got up and hugged her. She held me tightly, one hand pressed to the back of my head like she was grounding me to the floor. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "I never should have left you alone in this." We sat at the kitchen table, the same place where my dad had announced he was leaving. My mom listened as I filled in the details I hadn't managed to say the night before. How Jessica had been controlling, how Dad never defended me, how unsafe the house had started to feel. My mom didn't interrupt. Her jaw tightened with every sentence. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a folded document. "I didn't want it to come to this," she said quietly. "I hoped your father would still put you first." She smoothed the paper out on the table. "The deed. My name wasn't on it. My dad's wasn't either. Only hers." "I never told him," she admitted. "My parents insisted when we got married. They wanted to make sure I'd always have a home." A mix of emotions slammed into me. Relief, guilt, fear, something dangerously close to triumph. "What's going to happen?" I asked. My mom looked towards the stairs. "They're leaving," she said calmly. "Not you." Right on cue, footsteps thundered overhead. My dad came down first, still half asleep, confusion written across his face when he saw my mom sitting at the table like she belonged there. Because she did. "What are you doing here?" he asked. Jessica followed behind him, her expression shifting from surprise to irritation in seconds. My mom stood. "This is my house," she said evenly, "and I want you both out by the end of the week." The room exploded. My dad started talking all at once, about mortgages he'd paid, about fairness, about how this was his home too. Jessica jumped in, yelling about tenants' rights, about how she wouldn't be thrown out like trash. My mom didn't raise her voice. She just slid the deed across the table. "You tried to throw my underage son out," she said, her voice deadly calm. "I'm giving you more courtesy than you showed him." Jessica's face went white. My dad stared at the paper like it was written in another language. The fight lasted an hour. Threats, tears, accusations. But nothing changed. They retreated upstairs, defeated and furious. And I sat there, shaking, realizing that for the first time in months, maybe years, someone had chosen me without hesitation. The days that followed felt like living inside a pressure cooker. Dad and Jessica didn't leave right away. Instead, they lingered. Two people suddenly aware that the ground beneath their feet wasn't solid anymore, but still hoping it might crack in their favor. They stayed mostly in their bedroom, the door shut, voices rising and falling behind it, like a storm you could hear but not see. Sometimes I'd catch fragments when I passed by. My dad insisting this couldn't be legal, Jessica snapping that he should have known, blaming him for not securing the house. Mom, meanwhile, moved through the house with quiet purpose. She didn't gloat. She didn't provoke. She simply reclaimed space. She opened windows that had been kept shut. She put her books back on the shelves. She cooked dinner in her kitchen, humming softly like she used to when I was little. And Jessica hated every second of it. She started making passive-aggressive comments whenever they crossed paths. "This is really disruptive," she said one afternoon, standing in the hallway with her arms crossed. "You can't just show up and flip everyone's life upside down." My mom met her gaze, unflinching. "You did that when you walked into my marriage." Jessica scoffed but said nothing more. My dad tried a different approach. On the third day, he asked to talk, to all of us. We sat at the dining table again. Same chairs, same surface, completely different power dynamic. "I know things got out of hand," he began, rubbing his temples, "but this is still our family home." My mom didn't respond. He turned to me instead. "Look," he said, softening his voice. "You didn't mean what you said. You were angry. That happens. But you can't just let your mother destroy everything." My stomach twisted. "She didn't destroy anything," I said quietly. "You did." Silence. Jessica laughed sharply. "Wow, so she's turned you against your own father." That was it. My mom leaned forward, her voice steady but sharp enough to cut glass. "He didn't turn against you," she said. "He reacted to how you treated him. You don't get to rewrite that." The conversation ended there. After that, they stopped pretending. Jessica began packing dramatically, slamming drawers, muttering loudly about starting over and never being appreciated. She made sure we could hear her phone calls to friends, crying about how she was being kicked out of her home. Dad spent hours on the phone with a lawyer. I overheard him pacing in the backyard, his voice tight. "She can't just do this. I paid for everything. Yeah, I know my name's not on it, but still." When he hung up, he looked smaller, deflated. That night, Jessica left. She packed her things into her car and didn't even glance in my direction as she pulled out of the driveway. No goodbye, no apology, just gone. I expected to feel triumphant. Instead, I felt hollow. Dad wandered the house like a ghost after she left. He tried to talk to me, asked if I wanted to grab food, if I needed help with school stuff, but I wasn't ready. Every word from him felt too late. The day before he was supposed to move out, Dad asked to speak to both of us. I messed up, he said, voice breaking for the first time since the divorce. I handled everything wrong. I hurt you both. Mom listened, arms folded, her expression unreadable. I was scared, he continued. I didn't want to lose everything, and I ended up losing what mattered most. He looked at me. I'm sorry. I believed he meant it. But belief didn't erase damage. I need space, I told him. I'm not ready. He nodded, swallowing hard. Dad left the next morning. I watched from the window as he loaded his car, each box a piece of a life that no longer existed. When he hugged me goodbye, it felt like saying farewell to someone I used to know. And just like that, it was over, or so I thought. Because the fallout didn't end with them leaving. It followed us. After the house finally emptied of tension, I expected relief. What I got instead was silence so loud it pressed against my ears. Mom and I moved carefully around each other at first, like we were both afraid that one wrong step would crack the fragile calm we'd built. The house was ours again, but it was also full of echoes. Every room held a version of my dad that no longer lived there. Every corner reminded me that the family I'd grown up believing in had collapsed beyond repair. At night, I lay awake listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the distant traffic outside, the sound of my own breathing. That's when the questions came. What if I pushed too hard? What if I'd stayed quiet? What if I hadn't yelled? Guilt is sneaky like that. It doesn't care who's actually responsible. It just wants somewhere to land. One night, I heard my mom crying in her bedroom. I stood outside her door for a long time, my hand hovering inches from the handle, unsure whether I should go in or pretend I hadn't heard anything. Part of me still felt like the kid who needed her to be strong all the time. Another part understood, maybe for the first time, that she was grieving too. She'd lost a marriage, lost years, lost trust. And she'd carried it quietly so I wouldn't have to. School didn't help. Word spread faster than I expected. People knew my dad had left my mom for his secretary. Some knew Jessica had tried to kick me out. Some just whispered. I felt exposed, like my family drama had been turned into gossip currency. My grades wobbled again. I'd stare at my art, suddenly unsure if it meant anything. The thing that used to ground me felt heavy, like it was asking something from me I didn't have left to give. One afternoon, I snapped at my mom over something stupid. Dirty dishes, I think. She didn't yell back. She just looked tired. I know you're hurting, she said softly, but you don't have to carry this alone. That's when I broke. I sat down at the kitchen table and cried, really cried, for the first time since everything happened. I told her how angry I still was at my dad, how part of me missed him, how another part hated myself for missing him at all. I feel like if I forgive him, I admitted, it means what he did was okay. My mom shook her head. Forgiveness isn't permission, it's just letting go of the weight. But I wasn't ready to let go yet. The lowest point came unexpectedly. I was cleaning out the garage when I found one of my dad's old notes, something he'd written years ago after one of my basketball games. Proud of you. Keep pushing. You've got what it takes. I sat on the floor, holding that piece of paper like it might disappear if I loosened my grip. That was the man I missed. Not the one who stood by while I was threatened. Not the one who chose silence over protection. Just my dad. I felt split down the middle, between anger and grief, strength and exhaustion. Between wanting to move forward and wanting to rewind time to before everything fell apart. That night I told my mom I felt broken. She pulled me into a hug and whispered, "You're not broken. You're healing." It didn't feel like healing. It felt like standing in the wreckage, trying to figure out what parts of myself I could salvage. And I didn't know yet that the next step wouldn't come from forgiveness or revenge. It would come from understanding. The shift didn't happen all at once. It started quietly, on a Tuesday afternoon, in a room that smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant wipes. Therapy. I hadn't wanted to go at first. I told myself I was fine, that things were getting better now that my mom was back, now that the house was calm again. But calm isn't the same as healed. Calm is just what happens when the shouting stops. The therapist didn't rush me. She didn't tell me how to feel. She just listened. And then she asked one question that rearranged everything inside me. Why do you think your dad believed her? I opened my mouth to answer, and nothing came out. I'd spent months focused on what my dad did, on the betrayal, on the silence, on the way he chose Jessica over me and my mom. But I'd never asked why he was so easily controlled. That night, I asked my mom something I'd never thought to ask before. What was Dad like before me? She paused, drying her hands on a towel, her eyes distant. He grew up afraid, she said finally. His father was harsh. Nothing was ever enough. Your dad learned early that approval was something you earned and could lose. The pieces slid together. Jessica hadn't just replaced my mom in his life. She replaced the voice he'd been chasing his whole life, the one that told him he was important, successful, powerful. And when that voice turned against me, he didn't protect me. He protected his approval. That understanding didn't excuse what he did, but it freed me from carrying responsibility that was never mine. A week later, my dad asked to meet. Just him, no Jessica. We met at a small cafe halfway between our places. He looked older, smaller, like someone who'd finally run out of excuses. I'm in therapy, he said, hands wrapped around his mug. I'm trying to understand why I let things go that far. I didn't interrupt. I failed you, he said. I didn't choose you when it mattered. That sentence landed differently than any apology before it, because it was honest. I don't know if I can forgive you yet, I said quietly, but I'm willing to try, someday. He nodded, eyes wet. That's more than I deserve. That was the turning point. Not reconciliation. Not closure, but clarity. I stopped asking myself what I should have done differently. I stopped wondering if I'd ruined anything. I stopped shrinking to make space for other people's mistakes. At home, my mom and I began rebuilding, not just the house, but ourselves. We repainted the garage. I claimed it again. Hung my finished art on the walls, not because it was perfect, but because it was mine. Because I survived long enough to finish it. For the first time in a year, I started thinking about my future without fear. College applications didn't feel like escape plans anymore. They felt like choices. I wasn't running away. I was moving forward. And for the first time since my world cracked open, I knew something with absolute certainty. No one could throw me out of my own life again. The consequences didn't arrive all at once. They unfolded slowly, quietly, like gravity finally doing what it was always going to do. Jessica didn't disappear the way I thought she would. At first, I heard through someone at school that she'd moved in with a friend. Then another rumor surfaced. She and my dad were working things out. That one hit harder than I expected. It stirred up something old and sharp in my chest, like a warning siren I'd learned not to ignore. When I asked my dad about it weeks later, he didn't dodge the question. We're talking, he admitted, but things are different. Different wasn't reassuring. But what mattered more was what he didn't do anymore. He didn't bring her into my space. He didn't defend her behavior. He didn't ask me to forgive or forget. For once, he respected a boundary I didn't even have to explain. That was new. The real fallout came in quieter, more personal ways. My dad lost friends, people who'd quietly tolerated his affair when it was just gossip, but pulled away once the reality of how he'd treated his family settled in. Invitations stopped. Phone calls slowed. The life he'd thought he was upgrading didn't expand the way he'd imagined. It narrowed. At work, the promotion that had started everything lost its shine. Long hours, high pressure, no admiration waiting at home anymore. Just the slow understanding that success built on wreckage feels hollow when you finally stop running from yourself. Jessica, I learned later, wasn't thrilled with the new version of him. The version who said no. The version who went to therapy. The version who wouldn't let her dictate his relationship with his child. She hadn't signed up for accountability. They broke up again. This time it stuck. At home, Mom and I settled into something steady. Not perfect, not magically healed, but real. She found a full-time job she loved. I watched her laugh again, really laugh, at stupid sitcom jokes and stories from work. We redecorated the house, not as a victory lap, but as an act of reclaiming. New paint, new curtains, a vegetable garden that kept dying and being replanted anyway. The house stopped feeling like a battlefield. It felt like a refuge. My dad and I met occasionally, coffee, lunch, a basketball game at the park. The conversations were cautious but honest. He didn't demand closeness. He didn't rush forgiveness. He showed up, and that mattered more than any speech. Graduation came faster than I expected. Both my parents were there. They sat on opposite sides of the auditorium, not speaking, but not fighting either. Jessica wasn't there. That alone felt like a gift. When my name was called, I looked out and saw my mom on her feet, clapping like she'd never stopped believing in me. I saw my dad too, standing, hands shaking, pride and regret written all over his face. That moment didn't fix everything, but it didn't hurt either. It just existed. Afterward, my dad hugged me and said he was proud of me. This time I believed him. College loomed ahead, 2 hours away, close enough to come home, far enough to breathe. I wasn't leaving to escape anymore. I was leaving because I'd earned the right to choose my next chapter. The people who tried to control me lost their grip, not because I fought harder, but because I stopped giving them access. And that, I learned, is the quiet way consequences land. Now, when I walk through the house, it finally feels like mine again. Not because my dad left, not because Jessica was forced out, but because the fear is gone. The walls don't feel tight anymore. The silence doesn't press down on my chest. Some nights, my mom and I sit at the kitchen table long after dinner, talking about nothing and everything. College classes, books she's reading, plans we're making. Ordinary conversations that feel extraordinary because we earned them. I'm packing for college now. There's a box labeled Garage, filled with sketchbooks, brushes, half-finished ideas. The same art that was once dismissed as a waste of space is coming with me, front and center, because it kept me alive when everything else fell apart. My relationship with my dad isn't what it used to be, and that's okay. It's honest now, slower, built on boundaries instead of expectations. Some days are easier than others. Some days, the old anger flares up unexpectedly. Healing isn't linear, but it is real. What I've learned through all of this is something I wish every kid and every adult understood sooner. Being someone's parent doesn't give them ownership over you. Loving someone doesn't mean tolerating harm. And setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's survival. I used to feel guilty for being relieved when my dad and Jessica left. I thought it made me selfish, cold, unforgiving. Now I know better. You're allowed to feel safe in your own home. You're allowed to protect your peace. You're allowed to choose yourself, even when the people hurting you are family. My dad didn't lose his house because of me. He lost access to it the moment he forgot who he was supposed to protect. As for me, I didn't lose my family. I learned how to rebuild one, starting with myself. And that's a lesson I'll carry with me long after I lock the door behind me and step into whatever comes next.